Okay. All right. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Welcome to another edition of Beef, Bacon, and Eggs. And I'm delighted to have a good friend of mine who we've been talking a lot on Twitter. His name is Rory, and he runs Philosophy4Fit. Philosophy4Fit is an organization that looks at fitness from a philosophical perspective. Yeah, I'm really excited to have him on here. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, Rory, and how you came up with this idea of combining philosophy with fitness.
Hey, Robert, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, man. So the main reason I started bringing, I guess, more philosophical perspective into fitness is I found, because I have a kinesiology degree, so went through the whole process, learned, physiology, exercise, all the aspects of training and fitness, and decades of sports experience: lacrosse, hockey, football, rugby, boxing, the whole deal. But I found that there's a couple of things that were inadequate in just a purely scientific or empirical approach to these things. And there's a lot of gaps in the field, things that they can't explain, like even something as simple as delayed onset muscle soreness. So when you lift weights and then you're sore the next couple of days, well, there's varying explanations for why this occurs, and they have no one concrete answer. And you find this throughout my degrees. There's all these unexplained aspects. So I found that philosophy potentially provided some explanation for these gaps in the field, and especially in the gameplay aspect of sports. There's a lot of things that people just don't really think about when they're playing, like what approach, what mindset, what mode of being, you could even say, you take when you're engaged in the sport field. Those things kind of go unanswered, undiscussed. And I find that there's a rejection of a philosophical approach in favor of purely scientific approaches. And so that was the main reason I wanted to sort of, okay, philosophy is cool. I'm kind of a rookie on that when I started. Still an amateur for sure, but there's a lot of things that I'm finding that I think are pretty helpful to improve our understanding of the sport and fitness experience.
Very interesting. And that it's when we look at things like philosophical traditions, theories, of like when it comes to philosophy or religion, a lot of it is just it's all theoretical. That's what I find, and there's no real kind of real world application. You probably kind of see the same thing in the sports world. So can you give us a few examples, maybe from like a team sport perspective, a few practical examples of how Philosophy4Fit would address problems that occur at like a team level?
Yeah. So the number one thing that first set me off in trying to explain some of the gaps was throughout the 20th century, the scientific approach to fatigue was this muscle physiology first approach. So it was, okay, fatigue happens because the muscles get tired. So it's okay when like you give up, you hit failure whenever your muscles are done being able to produce force. And that was 100 years of our understanding was premised on that notion. And then at the beginning of the 21st century, they came to realize that, well, that might not be true, because obviously most people don't actually hit their failure. Your muscles can still move and work even when you think you've been completely, when you think you're too tired to go anymore. So there's a couple different theories that we read in my degree on this. And one example was this social biophysical model. Biopsychosocial model. So basically this guy, I think his name's Bakora, did research on athletes and had them take a step test. So like a graded exercise test that's supposed to take you to absolute failure. So you start at the basic intensity and then you keep going up every couple of minutes and it's supposed to slowly take you to the point where you can't go anymore. Those athletes are supposed to hit their failure and then give up. And then right after they finished this, he had them do a 10-second all out burst of intensity. So, and in this 10-second burst, he found that most of them, the average could hit about 80% of their power output. And so what this means is, well, even though they just supposedly went to absolute failure, they were still able to get 80% out of their body. So there's obviously signs there that it's not just the physical aspect, there's a mental aspect. Now in this model, they also look at the social aspect, what are the parameters around what you're doing, but then they can't necessarily go beyond that. So looking at that, I figured, well, there has to be a way to redefine your surroundings so that you can kind of get a better sense. So I take a look at how one might be in let's say they're playing lacrosse, and they can push themselves way beyond their failure if there's that competitive aspect, versus if you're just sprinting over and over. Let's say you're doing rushes down the floor back and forth. So the environment then plays a role, and this redefines how we look at the human person, because obviously if we take an approach that just treats the body in like you could say Cartesian way, like a mind-body dualism, and you say the physical body is something separate from the mind, and you're trying to explain fatigue physically, and then also just tapping on this mental aspect of this mind perceiving itself, you're limited because you take out the fact that the body is embedded in the world. So there's this sort of embodied cognition approach that says, well, you're someone that's embodied, the mind is embodied, and it is not just somewhere like some secondary dualistic aspect of the mind. It is present within the whole body, but it's also embedded in the environment. So the environment that you're acting in plays a role in how you approach a given physical situation. So then it becomes a lot easier to understand why someone might go beyond their failure, or even, let's say, they train past what skill level they thought. We find that athletes who go and play at a higher level, let's say you're playing at a low tier, and then you go try out for a team that's a couple levels above what you play. Suddenly you play up to that level. So you're not limited by your physical capacity based on what you see in that moment. Your limits are dependent on the social environment that you're embedded within, and your whole body, and if we assume it's embodied, so your mind is embodied within your physical body, it interacts in this sort of bidirectional way with your environment. So you have the mind, and then the body and the environment all interacting with each other to produce the outcome at any given time. And then that allows the individual, and hopefully coaches could take this as well, to go beyond just physical explanations of, why does my body fatigue, or why does my body perform at a certain level in given context, because then you can produce better results. If let's say you keep athletes at a set level, and they never get to experience playing in a social environment with a higher standard, then it becomes more difficult for those athletes to move up. Their environment shapes them the same way that your body shapes the skills you can develop. So you need all of these things interacting to produce the best results. And that's how I think, if this is practically applied, you can expand the scope of skill development.
Yeah, I remember, and I was never a baseball player. My sport was tennis. But I had a good friend of mine, good friends of mine actually from my hometown, and there was like I think it was a softball league, and they wanted to create their own softball team, and I believe they lost the first 82 games of the season. It was like a record. Like they never won one game. And I just I would watch them play, and it was almost like they weren't learning from their mistakes. It was almost like they were playing against teams that were better from them. better than them. But it was almost like the goal was every week to win, to get the W. But they never figured out, okay, what are the steps, in order to get better as a team, and then the results would just simply follow. So do you think that in sport, like if you don't have a like a good philosophy as a team, that you're just going to be stuck in that rut?
Yeah, that's very true. The team has to work as a unit, right? And we could bring in all this stuff. You could say like independent parts, non-independent parts, or you can talk about Plato and say that they're all sort of Neo-Platonist approach, where you say these are parts contributing to a unity. So obviously you could have one of one thing, but at the same time you could have 10 of one thing. But yeah, there's a difference between being like a set of individuals and then you just kind of participate in that team environment versus seeing yourself as a whole, as a unity. And a lot of that comes from getting to know your teammates. Like, and there's obviously the whole social aspect where you're not just there on its own for the sport. You're there with the sort of greater sense. So the whole is greater than some of its parts, right? And if a team fails to develop that sense of unity, and that can occur through, number one, having a team philosophy, and you could say it doesn't have to be anything complex. It can be something as simple as having a unified, concrete goal. And a lot of teams don't even take that first step. They don't even say, okay, we this season we want to do X. We want to win. We know what level we're at. Maybe we're not that great, but we want to win 2 games. Let's say it can be something very simple. But if you don't agree on that fundamental basis, then it's very difficult to participate in the sport as a unity. And to go beyond the level of playing of just playing for yourself, you have to agree on things, and then that way you sort of gear into each other better. So you get your participation in that given sports by having a unified direction, and then on the field, you sort of, in a way, you offload your thinking to your teammates on the field, and that's sort of what you want to aim towards, is where you can rely on the person beside you to have your back, literally see the floor, the field behind you, that kind of thing. And then you obviously end up playing much better that way.
Yeah, I noticed that when you transfer, because I started a tennis league when I was in my 20s. I was totally inactive. I was it was bad. Like I had absolutely no physical prowess whatsoever. But me and my friend fell in love with tennis, which is an individual sport. It was just singles games. But what I found was that when people came in from, say, baseball, they were playing team sports, all of a sudden, like, the game totally changed for them. So we had really incredibly physically fit men, but when they started playing tennis, they would get exhausted after one set. And then vice versa, when I started to play soccer, even though like I could play like a 2-3 hour tennis match, because it was just a totally different environment. I wasn't going to say, yeah, I would just get exhausted after a couple of minutes. So do you think that plays a role? This kind of like, it's not just about the physicality. I think what you were saying, it's not just about being able to physically do something, but it's just when you're in different sports, it's just a totally different world, and your body, just as physically fit as it can be, takes some time to adjusting to that different dynamic. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Because there's the aspect where there's the different energy systems that your body's going to utilize in a given sport. So obviously, yeah, if you're more used to long distance exercise, you're using the aerobic system, you're going for 30 minutes at a time, that doesn't automatically transfer to being able to sprint around really easily. But then beyond that, you can have people using similar energy systems. So your anaerobic system is divided into your anaerobic alactic and anaerobic glycolytic. So alactic is just like your 10-second all out, like maximum reps, and then the glycolytic is at up to 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. That's sort of the range with relatively high intensity. You can think about it's the energy system you'd be using in something like hockey or lacrosse, even tennis. So you have that, but you can even develop your anaerobic glycolytic system, that sort of that range, and still not see transfer right away to sports. Like, for example, when I play lacrosse, it doesn't automatically transfer to my boxing conditioning, even though I'm in perfectly fine shape, because that environment changes and because the movement patterns change. The basic energy system isn't quite enough. There's something more. So there's the movement pattern change up. That's one. And efficiency of movement pattern has to be developed through skill. But beyond that, there's a mentality, and the environment plays a role in that. And you can never reduce it to any one of those factors. They're all playing into how you train in a given environment. And if you don't have that mental adaptation, you could say, then you're going to miss. You're not going to be able to keep up at the same pace that you do for the sports that you're physically adapted to. So all these things, they're constantly overlapping, and I think we need to spend more time understanding how you can develop that mental. You could say how you gear into that new environment.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's very important. In today's society, like, it's just such a sedentary lifestyle. I mean, a lot of jobs are just sitting at a desk. And then, if we look at the youth, I mean, they're, spending almost all of their day, sitting in a desk, trying to absorb as much mental information as possible. And it can be very exhausting. And I know for myself, like I said, I was not physically active whatsoever. But like going back to like the tennis league, like it really, like looking back, like I should have, changed some things. I think, even though it was an individual sport, we were able to manage to get like 8, 10, 12 players of, different varying levels of skill, and, get them involved in kind of like this league where, even though it was individual matches, it was almost like this kind of camaraderie developed, which I thought was really cool because, even though like you're competing against somebody, at the same time, you want to see that person kind of improve, right? But I think one of the problems I had with the league is that I didn't have any divisions, and I just had everyone play everybody, and you had people who are very high skill level just destroy people, 6-love, and it was very difficult. I think that sort of turned a lot of people off. So, I mean, what's your message to like youth who like, kind of lead this like sedentary lifestyle and want to get involved in sport, but to them it just, I don't know, just feel like they don't, it's difficult to get them involved just because they feel like they won't belong, or they're afraid of failure. What kind of a general advice would you give? I know it's like a broad question, but I'll go on whatever tangent you want with that.
Yeah, sure. Because I've been there before, and it is difficult. But the thing is you kind of just have to throw yourself into the environment and then just figure it out, because you're never going to be good at anything the first time you go. It's easy. The younger you start, the easier it is, because, well, you're 4 years old, someone throws you on skates and you're falling around. You don't care because you're not even thinking about any of that. But that's more of a parent thing. Like, parents put your kids in those activities because then they develop the movement patterns without really thinking about it. You learn the quickest in that early age range, especially like 4 to 8 years old. Like, you can learn anything super quick and you don't really think about it. And then everything else becomes way easier. If you've already developed those movement patterns in that age range, then you can pick up new sports. You have the fundamental skills. But for someone that's a little older, again, you just have to not worry too much because everyone was a beginner at some point. Like for me, lacrosse, I didn't start playing until I was 10 years old. And that was, it was kind of scary jumping into a brand new sport. Oh, I was already good at, hockey, and already, I had my other sports. And then suddenly you have to learn this new thing where there's balls flying at you and people trying to hit you and you got no clue. But, after a year, next thing you know, you feel like you're just involved. They say it only takes about 20 hours before you get over that difficult, like frustrating learning aspect of anything. So if you just grind it out for the first 20 hours, you might look silly, but you can't have the fear of failure. And people expect you, like if you come in as a beginner, people expect you to act like a beginner. Like no one's expecting you to keep up at the highest pace. And more young people need to just jump into these things, and they need guidance. They need role models too. So it's not just if you're young and you're listening, if you're older and you're listening to this and you have people that you can be a role model to, get them going. And obviously it helps if they feel more comfortable. So hopefully they're not getting destroyed by someone way better than them. But even when I first started boxing, you'll end up sparring with people that are way better, but they're not going to go knock you out. Hopefully not. They'll give you some punches so you feel the pressure, and then you slowly adapt into that, and then you become comfortable in that environment to the point where you can just perform at the level that's required of you, and then you build off. Then suddenly you're completely invested into that. You could even call it a tradition of the sport. You've got all of the little bits and pieces ingrained, and then building off that platform, it becomes so much more smooth. And I'll use this word again. Once you get geared into something where you can kind of lock into the style and the, again, tradition of the sport, then everything is easier. But you just have to grind through those early, 20 hours of the difficult learning process, and then you're good to go. So don't need to worry.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about sport is that I feel, and I don't know if you agree with me or disagree with me, that sports are so necessary, especially for the youth, because it teaches you a lot about yourself and it's your whole life around you, how you deal with your job, how you deal with your relationships. I mean, even looking at when I started to learn how to play tennis, I just felt that even though I was pretty good at like these kind of baseline rallies, we didn't really go to the net very often at all, and we kind of I'm talking about we, like me and like my other players in my league, we were just hit the ball as hard as we could, going back and forth. I get our goal was trying to like break the speed limit on the speedometer, but there was this one guy in my league who was twice the age that I was, and he would just destroy me every single time, because even though he didn't hit the ball very hard, he would go to the net on every single point, whether he was serving or returning, and it would just frustrate the hell out of me. And I had to learn how to deal with net play. And even though like I just get so frustrated playing, and was like a mental block just winning a game off of him. It taught me how to be a better net player, but that kind of like took so long. And I just, like, I think that's kind of why my career was stagnating, because I was the kind of person who would stick to just one job and never really learn from my mistakes. But I think if I didn't have tennis, as like a sport, I don't think I would have progressed as like a human being. So I really think that, that fitness and sports programs, and even just pickup leagues that people just created on their own, I think that's really kind of lacking in today's society. Would you agree, Rory?
Well, it's definitely on the decline. You can still find yourself in sports leagues if you know where to look, and they're all there. But it's just, you have to be more intentional about it. It's not like, even when I hear my parents talk about growing up in the 60s and 70s, where, well, the neighborhood kids could just throw together a sports team whenever they wanted. So it's more difficult for sure. And the thing is they teach, at least in my experience, they teach that there is no correlation between what they call character building and playing sports. They say, oh, you can't make that claim. That was one thing they taught in my ethics courses. Like, oh, the idea that sports build character or improve you in some way is just an outdated um, uh, mode of thinking to justify, militarism or whatever, right?
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
They make those kind of claims, and then so obviously as a result, coming out of the academia, they don't necessarily they don't think it's important. It's not necessary development, and that's obviously not the case, because yeah, you can play sports and have bad character. You can be an athlete without virtue, you could say.
Mm.
That's possible. And you can go through and get worse because you play into the rules of the game in a way that you benefit yourself. And you can develop bad qualities, but then there's also the aspect of everything that you do develop, like the confrontations that you're forced into, especially at a younger age. A lot of these things that you could potentially, if you never got into any sort of competition, avoid your entire life until you're in the workforce. And then suddenly, what do you do when you're in this high pressure situation in your job, or even with relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to deal with, getting beat. That's the number one thing. You lose the game and you get destroyed. And how do you deal with that? And in sports, you just do that over and over again. I've had more more losing seasons across all my sports than I've had winning seasons. And eventually you learn, and that gives you a good insight into, well, how do I take a loss?
Mm-hmm.
How do I deal with someone making fun of me for taking a loss without, losing my mind at them?
Mm-hmm.
And more people than not take those lessons and are able to bring them forward in their life. That's what I've found.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't, it's still something that you experienced in a way that you had to adapt. And especially that team aspect, like you have guys that are, you could say ball hog type players. They do everything on their own. Even those guys have to be on a team. Like, yeah, you might be that kind of mindset, but you're still in a team environment for the entire year. And the majority of people aren't that. Majority of people are learning how to build camaraderie throughout the whole season, every season. And when you have those tough, especially physical trials, because it's easier to comprehend physical trials because it's a more concrete thing. When you work through physical trials together, you learn how to interact with other humans in that way. And losing that from society, having it less prevalent, or having it viewed as not necessary, as just an option, side thing you can do, that's reducing the amount of time that people get to experience and grow with others in that, in that aspect of physical struggle. Because it's not like it's present naturally anymore. So definitely a necessary thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen your tweets. You have your critiques of gym culture, and I have my own as well. Like a lot of the times, I think when people think about getting physically fit, it's all about going to the gym. It's all about getting gains. But there's no camaraderie with that, unless you have like a sparring partner. But I mean, if it's just all about gaining muscle, and I don't know, it's like it feels like there's something missing, right? And also, I've noticed with now, sports is has on seriously on a decline with a lot of youth, but and like we've switched over to video games, and even within like gaming culture, there's no like you're really lacking like a lot of the camaraderie, or like working together. I mean, like even when I was a kid, it was me and my brother playing a lot of like Yoshi's Cookie and like Tetris Attack, and even like these competitive 2-player games, but even that's gone. So I don't know, I just again, like what's like your like biggest critiques of like kind of like this, even amongst people who are physically fit, like this kind of like just stopping at like just this kind of gym culture? I mean, what do you think is like some of the fallouts from that?
Well, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I like the gym bro culture. It's not an end, and that's where a lot of people get held up is, oh yeah, we're sedentary, we aren't active, we need to get healthier, and they get that. And yeah, good. Like, you're taking the first steps, but sticking to the gym ends up being an individualistic pursuit. And you can have gym partners, but it's nowhere. There's a whole different environment when it comes to participating in that struggle with teammates, um, and the competitive aspect. Like, I can respect someone that does an actual competition, especially powerlifting or strongman, because you have that competitive aspect and you're forced to put yourself on the line in front of an audience. But most of these people, vast majority, are just stuck within the confines of that gym space and the muscle building. And then it all ultimately becomes a pursuit of vanity. How big can I get? And then that's where you see people go on performance enhancing drugs because, well, if I'm not as big as the next guy in my picture, well, then it's not good enough. And that completely diminishes, I would say, there's a further aspect of this where you have your soul. And if you're using your fitness to increase your vanity, well, then you're not really becoming better. So taking it back to the team aspect, like, so many people missing their like competitive and the camaraderie that comes from the teams. They're not really taking the full scope of change that's needed. And the trick, it gets tricky here, because if you're like a 20-year-old guy that no one told you to play sports, you never had to do that, you use gaming your whole life as opposed to sports, it's very difficult just to jump into any sport. The gym's easy because, well, you can just go there on your own and figure it out as you go. So I understand why people take that as the first step, but it's not enough if you want to like truly go beyond and have that full immersive fitness experience. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to just jump on a sports team and then start being active in that aspect, because it's not necessarily practicable for every single person. It's fine if you just want to be healthy, but it goes going back to that notion of the vanity and protecting your soul. If you are seeking a fuller development of your fitness, and it becomes about vanity, that's where the issue lies. So we always want to make sure that, like, we don't turn ourselves into narcissists through fitness pursuits like the muscle building, because at that point, you're damaging yourself in just a different way than you were when you were being sedentary. And so, if we understand the development of you could say your virtue through the team aspect of sports versus the individualistic pursuit of vanity of the gym approach, we can see that dichotomy can give us a sense of where we really want to aim our fitness. So at the end of the day, it's either got to be you're working towards bettering something beyond yourself, like a team, or let's say you're just trying to be a healthy person. So you're being healthy so you have a longer life for the sake of your children, or you can even say for the sake of God. You're healthy just because your body's a temple of God. You can even take it in that approach. And you want to differentiate that aspect where fitness is for something more than you, versus that approach where fitness is something purely for your own self glorification. And for most people, it's participating as a team helps you get out of that egocentric mindset when you're improving yourself.
No, very true. Like, I know even in my religious tradition, like, we have a saying that every action it goes by is rewarded by its intention, right? So, if your intention, is to become physically fit and physically active, you can reel off a list of things how that could be positive, not just for yourself, like you said, keeping your body as like a temple, but also, offering in service to humanity, like you're keeping physically fit, in case you have to defend your family. You're keeping yourself physically fit so you could be a better role model. You're keeping yourself physically fit so you can do better at your job, so you can live longer, so you can do more good deeds. I mean, with the intention, has to be there. But like you said, if your intention is just to like become this, like you said, kind of like this vain muscle man that doesn't give a crap about his world around him or his community, it goes all for naught. And I think that's a really important aspect that's kind of lost, like in a lot of these, like, or not lost, but I just not present, when we think about overall fitness. um so but yeah, I mean, there's really fascinating stuff, Rory. Is there anything else that we didn't really touch upon that you wanted to talk about? I know you talk about embodied fitness, where you just take like a holistic approach, although I don't know if you already kind of touched on that already.
Yeah, we kind of hit on that a little bit earlier at the start. Just that notion that, again, you can't isolate things into a physical or a purely mental sphere.
Yeah.
Like, you're within the environment, you're taking the whole account of how you're situated in relation to your physical abilities versus your mental appreciation of the environment, as well as how that environment acts back on you.
Mhm.
I guess the other thing is, with sort of within a similar vein, there's an aspect of skill acquisition and the way you develop skills. And so in skill acquisition, again, nowadays we view skill through this empirical mindset where it's okay. We know the body, we know the neurons, we see the reflex arcs, so we just approach teaching and skill acquisition through that lens of, well, if you can just make the body move a given way, well, then neural connections will slowly build, and then that's all there is to it.
Okay.
But I've been thinking about this in my coaching a little bit deeper, because I never coached in a way that's like, okay, well, you just move your move your body to this X degrees, or you're doing a pull up and pull your elbows to 90 degrees to make the pull up happen. You don't speak that way to a person with the purely empirical aspect of motion. You speak in a way that gets them to recognize how their body is supposed to move. So you don't really speak to their mental notion of themselves. You speak to how the body perceives itself.
Yeah.
And you get the mind to think about what the body's supposed to be doing. Because a lot of times, let's say someone sees a pull-up, like, they might mentally conceive it one way, but not know how to do it. Their body doesn't know how to do it. But when you're coaching them through it, you're giving them the language, the cues that you're giving them is, how do I change my notion of how my body is moving, so that I can make this happen more smoothly.
Yeah. Would you say, Rory, that because when I had all these baseball players coming in to join the tennis league, like you said, we did say, oh, aim your elbow at like a 90-degree angle when you hit things, because you could tell these people were former baseball players, because when they get into these rallies, sometimes they would just sky the tennis ball like over the fence. And we had to like tell them, like, look, I understand you came from baseball, but you don't want to hit a home run. What you want to do is you want to hit a line drive. So concentrating on hitting a line drive. It wasn't about, make sure your racket is at like, is parallel to the body and things like that. So referring people to sports that they already know, is that kind of like an example of that?
No, that's like a perfect example of that, because you're speaking to them into with a language that they can understand. Like, their body already understands that language, right? It's like it's already present within their movement pattern. So it's not even like you're taking like tennis language to explain it to them. You're giving them their own language and to make that adjustment. And anytime that we're coaching, like I said, we're never reducing to empirical approaches, because we're present firsthand in the world, not in what the scientific review said about the world. And then the next step beyond that is sort of, you have like this intentionality. And intentionality comes from philosophical school of phenomenology. That's a whole other thing. But the important characteristic is intentionality is the notion that your consciousness is always conscious of something. Like you never have consciousness of nothing.
Okay.
So when you're learning something, your intentionality, where you're directing your consciousness, is towards that particular skill. So if you're doing a crossover in hockey, you're thinking about just the crossover of the moment. But you can compare this to when you're in a game. If you're doing a crossover in a game, your intentionality isn't on the crossover. The crossover just comes out because the situation of the game demands you to use a crossover. So the key there is that you're coaching people to develop these skills so that they can be focused. They're mentally focused on the application of the skill and learning how to do it, so that the automatic pattern that comes out in the performance environment is the right kind of skill, because they don't have the ability to have intentionality towards the skill in the game. You need to think about, where's the puck? Where's the other players? Where am I taking that puck to? You don't think about, what does my crossover look like? And then that applies to all your different skills, is get these people to focus on the application of the skill in the right way. And that's what that language is doing. How do I conceive of the skill in my, directedness, where I'm pointing my consciousness? And do I have the right language for that? So I develop it properly. And then from there, when we can't have that ability to be conscious of that application of the skill, hopefully in a performance, or when that ball is flying at you in tennis, the right hit just comes out. But you've already practiced thinking through that hit with the right feedback from, a coach, or even from yourself. So that is more accurate to how we develop skills than just by, again, well, these neural patterns grow and develop and we can map those. That doesn't, sure, that's helpful and way behind the scenes, but that's not how things really come out in the moment.
Yeah, I think one of the other things I found was interesting is that you're talking about I think there's this intermediate level between these two things you're talking about when it comes to tennis, because I find a lot of kids, their parents will put them in these tennis academies and stuff, and for hours all they'll do is just hit balls. They won't be in an actual match where you have to keep score, right? I don't, even though I think that's good and I think it's necessary, I don't think it's sufficient, because once you start keeping score, it's just a whole other world. And I find a lot of these kids that are put into these tennis academies, once you start playing them, even though skill wise they might be better than you, quote unquote better than you, they're not used to thinking mentally, okay, what do I do if I'm down 15-40, or if it's 30 all, or being in an actual match with somebody. And I think match play is really missing from a lot of these tennis academies.
Yeah, and that's totally on track with what we're saying here, because eventually you have to bring that pure skill into where it is applied functionally. And I think it was Maurice Merleau-Ponty describes this notion of the founding versus the founded. So you have the founding is you could say for all intents and purposes, founding is just a skill on its own. And then the founded is what we build off of that, where it is present in the full environment. Now, there's obviously a wider philosophical scope for that distinction. But for the physical skills here, for example, it would be like, if I learn basic things about the world and then I develop abstract concepts on top of those things, that's what that founding versus founded dichotomy is. But a lot of coaches just coach things as founding. Here is your basics, and they never show you how that manifests in the founded, in the physical environment. I run into this in boxing all the time. This is something my coach talks to me about quite a bit, is you can have these guys that have the crispest punches and their skill is just so smooth and controlled. And then they go out and they box, and the other guy's just a sloppy mess, but he just crashes and bangs. He doesn't care that he's getting hit. He's going to throw more punches than you. And all those crisp punches don't mean anything unless you've been trained how to get in there, flip that go switch and just get them.
Yeah.
And so you always need this back and forth. You need to go bring those founding principles of whatever movement you might be, and then you need to bring them into the founding environment, and then it might be sloppy there, and then you have to bring them back, and it's this constant cycle back and forth, as opposed to just keep those areas separate the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. And I think both are needed. I think, if you just play matches all day and don't really hammer down the fundamentals, sometimes you can, that can have negative effects on your gameplay as well. So I think both are necessary, but they need to work in tandem with one another. Yeah, this has been a really fascinating conversation, Rory. Thank you so much for coming on. Now, do you actually Philosophy for Fit? Like, do you actually train? Do you do consultation, or is it more like starting at like a conceptual level when it comes to this?
Yeah, this is right now is just throwing around ideas online. Really, I do have a YouTube channel, but I've been very, very lazy with it, unfortunately. But I go on Tyler Hamilton's channel, talk about some things there as well. But yeah, for what we're doing now, it's just the concepts, just throwing around some ideas, and constantly trying to learn so I can bring them into practice better.
Wonderful, great. All right, yeah, that's great. I think that's all the time we have for today. But if you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe to my channel and Rory's as well. My channel is Islam for Europeans. We look at healing the broken relationship between Islam and the West, and talking about how those, which can be quite controversial, but now also still very important conversations to be had. And you can subscribe to Rory's YouTube channel or his Twitter account at Philosophy4Fit, two alphanumeric organizations. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Rory.
Thanks
I'm
for
your
having
host, Robert. No problem. Thank you very much. And have yourself a wonderful day, guys. Take care. And we'll end the stream now. All right, just end the stream. Okay, how do I end the stream? End the stream. Where was that? Is that it? Okay, close. Oh, there's that big red end stream button. And make sure I'm turning that off.